I gotta get this off my chest. My first ever Final Fantasy game was Final Fantasy 15. I remember playing it back in the day on Xbox One, and I just fell in love with it. I was hyped up before it released, and then when it did, I loved the game still. And outside of Skyrim, it was one of my first open-world games, and real dives into RPGs as a whole. You know, outside like MMOs like RuneScape or World of Warcraft. I fell in love with the characters, the vibe of the game, the aesthetic. It was so interesting and unique, and I just deep dived into it. I watched the movie Kingsglaive. I watched the anime Brotherhood that was about the main characters. I even remember watching Jesse Cox playing the demo of 15, where you played as a kid version of Noctis. I loved Final Fantasy 15, and in preparation for 16's release soon, I decided it would be a fun thing to revisit that game from all those years ago that started me on this Final Fantasy journey. I would stream my playthrough and introduce people to the game that got me into this phase of gaming that I'm really glad I got into. And I gotta tell you, dang, is it a story of ups and downs. The boys were as lovable as ever, the world as cool as ever, but dang does the game have some rough edges. And those rough edges are rough, with canyons as deep as the Mariana Trench rough. To me, Final Fantasy 15 is not just Final Fantasies, but one of gaming's best examples of a missed opportunity. Don't get me wrong, I still love the game, but a lot of that is because of nostalgia. I'll be completely fair in that regard, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think for a first time delving into FF or RPGs, is it representative of the other games in the series? No, not really, but it's still a fun time, and made me want to play the other games, even if they were different. But I think the thing that resonated with me the most over the course of playing through 15 again is just how close this game could have been to a complete masterpiece from top to bottom. I think one of the game's biggest faults is that it is a Final Fantasy game, and let me explain. Like, that isn't a knock on Final Fantasy per se, but to me, the game is the best representation of a growing pain for the franchise. Final Fantasy is synonymous with the 40-hour RPG, when a lot of other games elect to go for 100 plus hours. Final Fantasy tends to be less than half of that for an average playthrough. And back in the day with those older Final Fantasies, that pacing worked perfectly, because the pacing of the game in the style of FF6, 7, 10, or whatever is conducive to a story that goes plot point to plot point, where they can develop a world and a deep cast of characters in a relatively short period of time due to the inherent storytelling techniques those games and those types of games implemented, since they don't need to rely on long drawn-out facial animations and expressions for the most part. With just basic sprites, you can kind of rush through a lot of emotional swings and turmoils faster than you normally can with a game in the style of, say, 15 or 16, where you can clearly see the facial animations because it's far less jarring to go at that pace with sprites than it is for these more realistic-looking models. And the pacing is able to be fast enough because of this and other factors to make the story work in that 40-ish hour time slot. 15, on the other hand, isn't really that type of game. Instead of an overworld you breathe through like in 6 or 7, or being composed of linear hallways like in 10, 15 is a full open world that takes its time to traverse. You can stop and smell the roses, do side quests over vast fields. It's a game that is far more conducive to those slower paced and more laid back 100 plus hour experiences, but it's crammed into a 40-hour Final Fantasy time constraint. And I think that has such a massive rippling effect on the world design, story, characters, and overall pacing that it harms the game irrevocably because of it. Once you finish up Alticia, and you get on that train, there's not really an open world for you to explore, outside of the old one. There's no new zones, it's level after level, and a very, funnily enough, traditional Final Fantasy style of story, at least with its pacing, but the problem is the game's story itself is not one conducive to that pacing. You're trying to put a triangle into a square hole, sure, it's not either the triangle or the square hole's fault, they just don't vibe together. We spend so much more time comparatively in the open world developing these, or at least developing those locations and characters throughout the side content and main story, that when we got to these new locations like the Empire or Tenebrae or the Desert Place, they aren't given anywhere near the same amount of love or care as the original open worlds, so they feel less vast, and funnily enough make the world feel smaller because of it. And we breeze through those sections, Tenebrae almost being comical, as we make a glorified pit stop there to talk to maybe 3 or 4 NPCs and then we leave. Imagine, right? You got on the train and a new part of the open world became available, and you could use the train to navigate it to other new areas or something, and the game took its time to develop that area and maybe lean a bit more on the changing character dynamics of Noctis, Gladiolus, Prompto, and Ignis. Like, take more time to flesh out that part of the story. And then we move on to Tenebrae. It could have been home to a whole host of content and interesting dungeons as we delved into its ruined halls and flaming buildings to try and safeguard the memories of a now fallen nation being overrun by demons. Maybe Noctis reminisces on his time with Lunafreya as we add to her character and possible development, while also contrasting those aesthetics with the more modern-looking aesthetics we had in the base open world. Chapter 13 could have been cool if maybe the mechanics of the game were polished up a bit, and the map design made it so stealth was more enjoyable and tense, instead of just a slow slog, where especially nowadays you just use the ring and clap everything. So nothing even feels like a threat, nothing scary, at least to me. So the main feel and tone that mission's going for just falls flat on its face. Like, they added the Gladiolus and Ignis bit, which I still have to go back to do again, but still. Like, sure, that is something. And I remember doing this mission on release. It was really bad, but still, this mission could have been so much more, just completely something different. I like how they tried to introduce new tones throughout this game and have certain sections feel more dark or horror inspired, but they just didn't execute on those ideas well, in my opinion. Like, imagine, right? Imagine if Chapter 14 was more fleshed out, as we retreaded familiar zones now overrun by the night and demons as we collected the last vestiges of the kings of the past, as we learn a bit more about them as well, and they bestow Noctis upon some ancient wisdom, and we tie off the development of each character, like Prompto, Ignis, and Gladiolus, as we will all reminisce on our time together, like one last road trip with the boys. Sure, some people may call that kind of stuff filler, but if you add a bunch of character development and finality to those character stories, it would feel natural in my opinion, and also really allow us to appreciate what has come and what has happened to the world. Like, just treating the second half of the game's chapters like we did the first half could have done so freaking much, man. From top to bottom, 15 has the potential to be one of the best games ever made in my opinion, and not just from its cult following that I may or may not be a part of. I love Final Fantasy 15, I will always love this game, but it could have been so much more. The combat is unnecessarily clunky, the world can feel weirdly empty at times. Not always, mind you, but sometimes. Characters can just kind of fall flat, like that one dude that just wants dog tags. The story's pacing is all over the place, even in the early game, as it relies on using spliced up scenes from the movie Kingsglaive to try and ignore the fact that everyone that will play 15 is going to go watch a separate movie. The story and development we got in Kingsglaive and Brotherhood's anime could have been incorporated into the base game in interesting ways. That way, the progression feels natural, the story unravels, and the story could feel more cohesive because of that. Because the base game relies far more on telling, not showing, than it should have. When you can just show it, because you have all these other stories you were already telling in other pieces of media. Just incorporate that into the game in a more cohesive way. Like, imagine if the fall of Insomnia had an entire chapter behind it where you played as the king and you witnessed the downfall of everything. Like, you turned Kingsglaive as a chapter, as like from a movie, into a chapter in the game. That could have been so freaking cool. It's funny because I played the Gladiolus DLC and his playstyle is genuinely pretty fun. And I played a bit of Prompto and Ignis at the end of the game, and they were unique and great as well to play. Imagine if the game let you swap between these four from the start, to do different challenges or just play the way you wanted. It would give you diversity in the gameplay while also making combat more interesting in my opinion, as there are a bunch of weird animations and camera placements that take place during combat that just make it feel clunky and hard to follow at times, and just kind of takes you out of it. But they clearly can make combat interesting and fun. They did it with the other three members. Lean in that direction, and I'm sure Noctis' playstyle could be fine-tuned to be more enjoyable. Lean into Warp Strike a bit more. It's a great mechanic. I love Warp Strike. It saves the combat for me. Just let me zoom the camera out way more than you do. And that fixes a lot of issues I have with that one mechanic. You could do a mechanic, say, where I can unlock an ability in the talent tree that allows me to slow time down, mark certain targets, kind of like Ignis' ability, but I do it manually. Maybe let me target certain limbs that I want to target, and I can do a series of warp strikes that get progressively more powerful. That's a little bit of strategy. That's something to let me think about as the player. That's just like one idea. There's so many things you could have done here to make Noctis' combat style just a little bit more interesting. Get rid of like holding down the button and like moving the stick for different combos. That's stupid. in my opinion. Like, give me like a basic melee combo and allow me to use Warp Strike intermittently to change up combos or something, or swap between different weapons while I'm in a combo to do different things. That could have been cool. I don't say this a lot about games, about a lot of games, but I genuinely wonder what a remake of 15 would look like. Not just to change the little stuff, but expand and flesh the game out and give it the time it truly needs to be special. They tried it a little bit with the DLCs, but that fell through. I just can't stop thinking about how good this game could have been, how special it could have been, truly be. It will, unfortunately, perpetually be a game of what ifs. What if the combat flowed better? What if the camera was better? What if we could play as the other characters on a whim? What if the pacing of the story wasn't god-awful? What if we could explain or explore those later zones? What if the open world had more engaging things to do in them other than side quests? What if the main party and other side characters had more time to develop? What if the game didn't stutter a ton on my PC? What if the story of Kingsglaive and Brotherhood was properly incorporated into the game? What if? We'll almost certainly never know. My dreams of a potential Final Fantasy 15 remake are a pipe dream. They're fun to think about, but almost certainly will never happen. And I think it's unfortunate, because I'll always love this fun little road trip with the boys. But and I think a lot of you, could have loved it so much more had things been only a little bit different. But I still love the game. I do. From finding the various recipes for Ignis, taking the photos with Prompto, camping with the boys, the XP system, I love that personally. Fishing, oh my god, fishing was so cool. The sense of scale this world had as well, it was so good. I think having weapons be one of the main collectibles was a great idea as well. There were certain side quests that were just lovable and put a grin on my face from ear to ear. Like, remember that one quest where Prompto just wanted to impress Cindy, so all the boys were willing to help him out? It was great. It added to the sense of the dynamics of the party. Remember that one product placement quest for Cup Noodle, where it was just Gladiolus loving Cup Noodle, and they'd climb a mountain or something to find the mythical golden Cup Noodle, or whatever? It was hilarious. It was funny. They knew when they had to take themselves seriously and when they didn't. When they could just lean into the aesthetic of 4 dudes go on a road trip. Why not? The pictures you could select at the end of every chapter just added a little bit of personal flair to it. Customizing the regalia, playing your own music, collecting music. So good! The fact you can unlock flying for the freaking regalia. You can tell there was love and care that was put into this game. It's just sometimes you need a little bit more than love and care. The ending is still one of my favorites. It really is. Yeah, the final boss sucks. It's really bad, like, it's god-awful. I think that mostly stems just from the camera, though, and the clunky controls. You fix those two things, and that fight, like, in concept is really cool. But god, that ending. You guys are the best. You know, that's one of the only scenes that ever maybe brought a tear to my eye in video games. It's like that scene, and maybe one or two others. For all the games I played, this freaking game was the one. Way back in the day. God, I love the ending. It's funny, because when they even talked about having DLC bring a new ending, I wasn't even fully on board with that, because I loved the ending we got. I thought it was one of the best aspects of the game, personally. And god, it's hard to beat 15's aesthetic. It really is. It's something about blending, like, modern technology and world design, but just have a bunch of magic there as well. And that's another thing, the magic system in this game. Yeah, by itself, it's really underwhelming for a Final Fantasy game, but if you give a more traditional magic system like Final Fantasy normally has, and you have this as a supplement alongside that, don't lie to me, that'd be really freaking cool, right? Like, being able to, like, combine various modes of elements with items to create interesting, essentially, grenades that have different effects. If you properly utilize that, it's freaking hilarious. I remember watching people discover XP grinds where you just get a bunch of magic spells that give you so much XP and you just throw them at a bunch of enemies and you gain dummy amounts of XP. It's funny. The game allowed you just to have those dumb little fun moments. And to me, if you treat the game not like a Final Fantasy game, not like a game about light versus dark, but just as a game about 4 boys going on a road trip, and you lean into that, I think you'll enjoy the game. I sure did. I still do. I still love Final Fantasy 15, but yeah, I do think it's Final Fantasy's biggest missed potential. Possibly in all of gaming as well. It dreamed of the stars only to climb a tree. Still an impressive feat, but it had greater aspirations. I'm gonna call the video there for the day. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure for making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe, have a great day, go play some video games if you can, and as always, I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody, until we meet again.